The countries that control the world's internet. Part 1. The illusion of a wireless civilization. The modern human believes he lives in a wireless civilization. He opens his laptop, watches videos, transfers money, sends military intelligence, trades stocks, orders food, attends university lectures, and speaks across continents without ever seeing a single wire. The interface is invisible, the machinery is hidden. That illusion is one of the greatest strategic disguises in modern history. Civilization today doesn't run on the internet as most people imagine it. It runs on infrastructure, massive, physical, vulnerable infrastructure. Steel, fiber optic glass, data centers, cooling system, semiconductor fabs, electrical grids, deep sea cable landing stations, server farms consuming the energy of entire cities. The internet is not a cloud floating in the sky. It is an industrial empire spread across ocean, deserts, mountains, and geopolitical fault lines. Every Google search, every banking transaction, every cryptocurrency transfer, every military command, every drone feed, every stock trade, every Netflix stream, every AI prompt, every government surveillance operation travels through a gigantic hidden nervous system beneath humanity. The people who control the infrastructure of that nervous system possesses leverage over the modern world itself. The first strategic misunderstanding most people make is assuming that digital power is abstract. It is not abstract. Digital power is geographic. It is territorial. It obeys choke points, energy constraints, industrial capacity, maritime security, and military protection. The Internet ultimately obeys physics and logistics. That means it also obeys states. This is why countries fight over semiconductors. This is why naval fleets patrol sea lanes. This is why the United States protects Taiwan. This is why China builds alternative payment systems and satellite networks. This is why Russia talks about sovereignty. Correction. This is why Russia talks about sovereign internet architecture. This is why undersea cables have become military targets. The world after the Cold War was supposed to become borderless. Instead, digital globalization created a new form of empire. Not empire through direct colonialism, but empire through infrastructure dependence. Countries today may appear sovereign politically while remaining digitally dependent on foreign systems they do not control. A nation can possess an army and still depend on foreign cloud servers. It can possess nuclear weapons while relying on imported semiconductor technology. It can possess millions of soldiers while routing internet traffic through infrastructure owned by geopolitical rivals. This isn't true sovereignty, it is managed dependency. The average person sees the surface layer of technology, smartphones, apps, social media platforms, artificial intelligence, but those are merely the consumer facing skin of the system. Beneath them lies the real architecture of power. The hierarchy of modern digital civilization looks something like this. At the top are semiconductor manufacturing capabilities. Without advanced chips, modern computing collapses. Beneath that are operating systems, cloud computing networks, and data centers. Beneath those lie undersea cables and telecommunications infrastructure. Beneath all of it lies energy production itself, because digital civilization consumes extraordinary quantities of electricity. Artificial intelligence accelerated this dependency structure dramatically. AI is not merely software. AI is industrial scale computational warfare. Training advanced AI systems requires enormous amount of chips, electricity, cooling infrastructure, and data transmission capacity. This means future geopolitical dominance will not belong merely to nations with talented programmers. It will belong to nations capable of sustaining gigantic infrastructure ecosystems. The Internet therefore transformed from a communications network into a strategic battle space. For decades, most citizens barely noticed this hidden architecture because the system functioned smoothly. Data moved instantly, payments cleared rapidly, videos streamed continuously, but stability creates complacency. People stopped questioning systems that appear permanent. Then, crises began exposing the machinery underneath. During war, internet access suddenly vanished. During geopolitical disputes, semiconductor exports were restricted. During sanctions, payment systems disconnected entire economies. During cyber attacks, pipelines were shut down. During cable disruptions, entire regions lost connectivity. The illusion cracked. People began realizing that digital systems are not neutral utilities, they are controlled environments shaped by states, corporations, militaries, intelligence agencies, and infrastructure monopolies. Among all nations, one country emerged as the dominant architecture of this digital order, the United States. American dominance over the global internet didn't appear accidentally. It emerged from a combination of military research, private capital, university ecosystems, semiconductor leadership, naval supremacy, post-Cold War geopolitical timing. The early internet itself emerged as ARPANET, a US Department of Defense project designed for resilient communications during potential wartime scenarios. Silicon Valley evolved inside an ecosystem heavily influenced by military contracts, Cold War funding, elite research universities, and venture capital concentration. Over time, American companies captured the highest layers of digital slack. Microsoft controlled operating systems, Google controlled search infrastructure, Amazon dominated cloud computing, Apple controlled premium hardware ecosystems, Meta controlled social networking infrastructure, Nvidia became the critical supplier of AI chips. Even much of the world's internet traffic passed through American control systems. This created something historically unprecedented, a privately operated global empire backed indirectly by state power. Traditional empires occupied territory physically. The digital empire collapses dependency chains. When European companies use American cloud services, dependency forms. When Asian manufacturers depend on American chip architecture, dependency forms. When governments store sensitive information inside foreign control systems, dependency forms. When entire societies communicate through foreign social media platforms, dependency forms. Control over infrastructure creates informal gravity, and informal gravity eventually becomes political gravity. China understood this danger earlier than many countries. Beijing observed how American infrastructure dominance translated into geopolitical leverage. The Chinese state therefore began constructing parallel systems, domestic platforms, domestic payment systems, and domestic cloud systems, semiconductor programs, satellite network, and eventually the Digital Silk Road Initiative. This was not merely technological competition, it was sovereignty competition. By the 21st century is increasingly defined by a struggle between interconnected globalization and fragmented technological spheres of influence. One side promotes an open but American centered internet architecture, the other side pushes for sovereign, state controlled digital ecosystems resistant to external pressure. Between them stand Europe, India, Russia, Southeast Asia, Africa, and Latin America, regions attempting to navigate dependency without compete, com- without complete subordination. But beneath all this debate lies the central reality most people still fail to understand. The internet isn't virtual, it is physical. And whoever controls the physical architecture of information controls the bloodstream of modern civilization itself. Part 2: Undersea cables, the hidden arteries of humanity. When most people imagine the internet, they imagine satellites floating above Earth, sending information magically across the sky. Hollywood reinforced this illusion for decades. It is visually dramatic, simple to understand, and almost entirely misleading. More than 95% of international internet traffic doesn't travel through space. It travels through cables lying on the ocean floor, thousands of kilometers beneath the sea. Hidden under darkness and pressure lies one of the most important infrastructure ever created by human civilization, the global undersea cable network. These cables are the true arteries of globalization. Every international bank transfer, military communication, stock trade, AI query, video call, oil market transaction, diplomatic message flows through these underwater systems. Modern civilization is effectively tied together by fragile strands of fiber optic glass thinner than a garden hose. The scale is enormous. Hundreds of submarine cable systems connected continents together in a gigantic planetary nervous system. They cross the Atlantic Ocean, Pacific Ocean, Indian Ocean, Mediterranean Sea, Red Sea, South China Sea, and Arctic waters. Some stretch for more than 20,000 kilometers. And yet, despite their importance, most people have never seen one. That invisibility is strategically dangerous. Civilization fear threat. They protect visible infrastructure aggressively, but invisible infrastructure is often neglected until catastrophe occurs. Undersea cables represent one of the greatest examples of this paradox. A single damaged cable can disrupt financial markets, military coordination, internet speeds, and communication across regions. Multiple coordinated disruptions could paralyze economies. This creates an uncomfortable reality. The internet isn't merely a technological system, it is a maritime system. This means that naval power matters again. The countries capable of securing oceans possesses indirect leverage over global information flows. This is one reason the United States remains extraordinarily powerful. American naval dominance after World War II didn't merely secure oil shipping routes, it also secured the maritime foundations of global digital civilization. The Atlantic Ocean became the central highway of Western digital connectivity. The Pacific became the bridge between American and Asian technological ecosystem. Strategic choke points such as the Strait of Malacca, the Suez Canal region, the South China Sea gained digital importance alongside traditional trade significance. Geography never disappeared. Technology simply hid it beneath abstraction. The cable systems themselves are engineering masterpieces. Fiber optic strands transmit data using pulses of light traveling across enormous distances at incredible speeds. Repeater stations placed along the route amplify the signal periodically to prevent degradation. Building these systems require extraordinary capital, technical expertise, specialized ships, geopolitical coordination, and long-term planning. Only a limited number of countries and corporations possess the capacity to manufacture, deploy, repair, and maintain such infrastructure. This concentration creates another layer of power asymmetry. For decades, telecommunications giants dominated the submarine cable industry, but over time, major technology corporations began taking direct control. Companies like Google, Meta, Amazon, and Microsoft increasingly financed and owned undersea cable systems themselves. Why? Because whoever owns the infrastructure controls cost, speed, security, and strategic independence. Cloud computing intensified this strength as data consumption exploded through streaming. Artificial intelligence, cloud storage, and digital services controlling the physical environment of information became economically critical. The result is extraordinary. Some of the world's most powerful infrastructure systems are no longer owned primarily by states, but by corporations whose economic influence rivals governments. This blurs the line between corporate power and geopolitical power. When a tech company builds a cable connecting continents, it is not merely making a business investment. It is shaping the future map of digital connectivity. It determines which regions become integrated into major data flows and which remain peripheral. Connectivity becomes economic gravity. Regions connected to major digital routes attract investment, data centers, AI infrastructure, fintech systems, startups, and logistical integration. Regions excluded from these networks remain digitally dependent and economically weaker. This is why Africa has become increasingly more important in infrastructure race. For years, much of Africa suffered from weak connectivity and limited digital integration. But as populations grew and internet usage expanded, major powers recognized the continent's strategic future value. China moved aggressively through infrastructure financing. America and European firms increased cable investment. Gulf states recognized the importance of becoming transit hub between Europe, Asia, and Africa. The struggle for digital influence entered a new continental phase, but alongside economic opportunity came security fears. Undersea cables are vulnerable. Undersea cables are vulnerable. Sometimes damage occurs accidentally. Anchors drag across the seabed. Fishing operations interfere with cables. Earthquakes disrupt routes. Natural deterioration occurs over time, but strategic planners increasingly worry about deliberate sabotage. Modern militaries understand that information infrastructure is now a part of warfare itself. Imagine a future conflict between major powers. Missile alone would not define the battlefield. Cyber warfare, satellite disruption, electronic warfare, semiconductor embargoes, and cable sabotage could become equally important. Cutting or disrupting cables wouldn't necessarily turn off the internet connectivity completely. Networks are designed with redundancy. Traffics are reroute. Traffics can reroute through alternative systems. Satellites can provide limited support, but redundancy has limits. A sufficiently large disruption campaign could create chaos. Financial systems depend on milliseconds. Military systems depend on uninterrupted communications. AI systems depend on gigantic data transfers. Cloud systems depend on constant synchronization between server regions. Even temporary disruptions can generate cascading economic consequences. This is why governments increasingly monitor submarine infrastructure with military seriousness. Russia's activities around undersea infrastructure have attracted attention from NATO states. Chinese maritime expansion raises concern regarding strategic positioning near cable routes. Western intelligence agencies increasingly discuss infrastructure security publicly. The seabed is becoming militarized, and unlike aircraft carriers or missile systems, cable warfare is ambiguous. Attrition is difficult, damage may appear accidental, responses threshold remain unclear. This ambiguity creates undersea infrastructure attractive for gray zone operations, actions below the threshold of open war. The future battlefield may therefore include invisible wars fought thousands of meters beneath the ocean surface. At the same time, new technological transformations are increasingly dependent even further. At the same time, new technological transformations are increasingly At the same time, new technological transformations are increasing dependency even further. Artificial intelligence systems require enormous cross-border data movement. Cloud gaming, remote work, digital finance, autonomous systems, military drones, and algorithmic trading all intensify bandwidth demands. Civilization is becoming more connected while simultaneously becoming more fragile. That is the paradox of advanced infrastructure systems. Efficiency creates dependency, dependency creates vulnerability. Historically, historically, empires depended on roads, ports, railways, and shipping lanes. Today, empire depends on fiber optic arteries hidden beneath oceans, and the nations that dominate these arteries possesses extraordinary leverage over the global system. But cables alone do not create digital supremacy. Data must go somewhere after it travels, which leads to the next layer of hidden power, the gigantic forces like facilities known as data centers. Part 3. Data centers, the industrial fortresses of digital age. Most people imagine the internet as something weightless, a cloud, a stream, an invisible digital atmosphere floating around humanity. But the cloud is not a cloud, it is a factory, a gigantic industrial machine consuming land, electricity, and water, as well as rare minerals, cooling infrastructure, semiconductors, geopolitical stability at scale most citizens cannot comprehend. The modern internet ultimately lives inside data centers. Those facilities are among the most important structures on Earth. They are the storage vaults, processing engines, communication hubs, and memory systems of modern civilization. Inside them exists humanity's digital existence, banking systems, government records, intelligence databases, AI models, streaming platforms, military logistics, stock exchange, corporate secrets, medical records, social media archives, surveillance systems, and communication networks. If undersea cables are arteries of the digital world, data centers are its organs. And increasingly, they resemble strategic military assets more than ordinary commercial buildings. From the outside, many data centers appear unimpressive, giant grey warehouse in isolated industrial zone, but this appearance is deceptive. Inside are rows upon rows of servers operating continuously, generating enormous heat while processing unimaginable volumes of information every second. These facilities operate 24 hours a day without pause. Civilization itself depends on their uninterrupted function. A major outage inside a critical cloud region can disrupt business, governments, hospitals, transportation systems, financial markets, military operations simultaneously. Modern societies are now deeply integrated into centralized digital infrastructure. That centralization creates efficiency. It also creates concentration risk. The risk of cloud computing accelerated this transformation dramatically. Before cloud dominance, many companies operated their own local servers, but maintaining infrastructure internally was expensive and inefficient. Gradually, corporations outsourced computational capacity to specialized providers. This produced one of the greatest consolidation of power in modern history. Today, a small number of companies dominate global cloud infrastructure. Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud collectively form the backbone of much of the modern internet. Countless businesses that appear independent actually operate on infrastructure controlled by these firms. This means that portions of global economic activity depend indirectly on a tiny cluster of infrastructure providers. The concentration is staggering. Startups, governments, universities, media companies, logistical systems, pharmaceutical firms, financial institutions, artificial intelligence platforms often rely on the same cloud ecosystem. Even competitors frequently share identical infrastructure foundations. This creates systematic interdependence at a scale previous civilizations never experienced. In older eras, economic collapse often spread through shipping failures, crop destruction, or banking crisis. In today's case, a digital infrastructure failure can spread disruption almost instantly across entire sectors. A cloud storage in one region can affect airlines, hospitals, payment systems, entertainment platforms, and military contractors simultaneously. Civilization became efficient by becoming centralized, but centralized systems create attractive targets. This is why data centers increasingly receive security protections once reserved for strategic infrastructure. Physical barriers, surveillance systems, cyber security teams, backup generators, redundant networking systems, armed security, geographic diversification have been standard. Some facilities are hardened against natural disasters, others are positioned near stable electrical grids or cold climates to improve cooling efficiency. Some governments even consider certain digital infrastructure assets strategically sensitive because whoever controls computational infrastructure increasingly controls economic reality itself. Artificial intelligence accelerated this dynamic even further. Training advanced AI systems requires extraordinary computational resources, massive GPU clusters, process enormous datasets continuously for weeks or months. This consumes huge quantities of electricity and generates enormous heat. As AI competition intensifies, countries are beginning to realize that computational power is becoming comparable to industrial power during the 19th and 20th centuries. The Industrial Revolution was powered by coal, steel, railroads, and oil. The AI revolution is powered by chips, electricity, data centers, cooling systems, and bandwidth. The implications are enormous. Countries lacking large-scale computational infrastructure risk technological dependence. Nations capable of sustaining advanced AI ecosystems may dominate finance, military intelligence, scientific research, cyber warfare, logistic optimization, automation, and surveillance capabilities. The geopolitical competition is therefore shifting towards computational sovereignty. The United States currently dominates much of this infrastructure landscape. American firms possess enormous advantage in cloud computing, advanced chip design, software ecosystem, venture capital, and AI research. But maintaining dominance requires gigantic energy consumptions. Data centers consume extraordinary amounts of electricity. AI systems magnify this demand dramatically. Some advanced facilities now consume as much electricity as small cities. This creates a hidden connection between digital power and energy geopolitics. The future of AI supremacy may depend not only on algorithms but on energy infrastructure itself. Countries with stable power grids, large infrastructure production capacity, and strong semiconductor ecosystem possess structural advantages. Nations facing electrical instability or insufficient infrastructure may struggle to compete. This is one reason Gulf states are entering the AI race aggressively. Oil wealth alone is no longer sufficient for long-term geopolitical influence. Computational infrastructure offers a pathway toward post-hydrocarbon strategic relevance. Similarly, China is investing heavily in domestic semiconductor ecosystem, AI infrastructure and cloud capabilities to reduce vulnerability to American pressure. Europe faces a different challenge. It possesses advanced economies but remains relatively dependent on American cloud systems. Semiconductor supply chains. Enormous leaders increasingly discuss digital sovereignty because they recognize the strategic danger of excessive external dependence. India represents another fascinating case. India possesses massive human capital advantage, software talent, and an enormous digital population, but scaling into a true infrastructure superpower requires semiconductor manufacturing expansion, stable energy growth, advanced data center ecosystems, and deep industrial investments. Demographics alone are insufficient. Infrastructure determines whether population becomes power or merely pressure. Meanwhile, smaller nations increasingly compete to become data infrastructure hubs. Countries like Singapore, the UAE, and Ireland transformed themselves into strategic digital gateways by attracting cloud infrastructure investments through tax policies, stable governments, connectivity advantages, and energy availability. This reveals an important truth about the digital age. Territory still matters, geography still matters, energy still matters, infrastructure still matters. Technology didn't eliminate geopolitics, it intensified it. And beneath all of this lies another layer of hidden dependency far more critical than most people realize. Because data centers cannot function without advanced semiconductors, and the world's semiconductor system may be the single most fragile foundation of modern civilization. Part 4. Semiconductors, the tiny machines holding up civilization. Modern civilization rests upon objects so small that millions can fit inside the palm of a hand. These objects are semiconductors, the microscopic engines powering nearly every system humanity depends on: smartphones, fighter jets, satellites, missiles, banks, AI systems, cars, hospitals, power grids, stock exchanges, industrial robots, cloud servers, nuclear infrastructure, and military communications all depend on advanced chips. Without semiconductors, modern civilization collapses within days. Food logistics fail, financial systems freeze, telecommunications deteriorate, energy infrastructure destabilizes, transportation networks malfunction, military systems lose coordination, artificial intelligence disappears almost instantly. This makes semiconductor more strategically important than in some respects. Oil powered the industrial age, chips powered the digital age, and unlike oil, semiconductor manufacturing is concentrated in an extraordinarily fragile geopolitical structure. Most people assume modern globalization diversified production. In reality, semiconductor manufacturing became dangerously centralized. The world's more advanced chips are produced primarily in a handful of locations, with Taiwan occupying the most critical position. At the center of this system stands TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, arguably the most strategically important corporations on India. Correction, arguably the most strategically important corporations on earth. TSMC manufactures advanced chips for companies across the globe, including firms from United States, Europe, Japan, and even China. Apple, Nvidia, AMD, Qualcomm, and countless other companies depend heavily on Taiwanese manufacturing capacity. This creates one of the greatest geopolitical vulnerabilities in modern history. A single island became central to global technological civilization. The implications are terrifying for strategic planners. If Taiwan's semiconductors production were disrupted through war, blockade, sabotage, cyber attack, or political crisis, the economic consequences would the likely exceed most previous global recessions. Entire industries would freeze simultaneously. Automotive, automotive production would collapse. AI development would slow dramatically. Consumer electronics markets would shatter. Military procurement pipelines would suffer severe disruption. Financial markets would panic. This is why Taiwan matters far beyond its geographic size. Publicly, major powers discuss democracy, sovereignty, international law, regional stability. Beneath those official narratives lies a harder strategic reality. The semiconductor ecosystem is too important to lose. For the United States, Taiwanese semiconductor security became deeply connected to national security itself. American military systems, technological leadership, and AI dominance depend heavily on cheap access. For China, dependency on foreign controlled advanced semiconductors represent a strategic vulnerability unacceptable for a rising superpower. This tension transformed chips into strategic and geopolitical weapons. The semiconductor industry used to operate primarily according to economic efficiency. Today, it increasingly operates according to strategic competition. Export controls, sanctions, technology restrictions, investment bans, and industrial subsidies have become central tools of statecraft. The United States imposed restrictions on advanced chip exports and semiconductor manufacturing equipment to China in order to slow Beijing's progress in advanced computing and AI. Washington understood a brutal reality: control over semiconductor means control over future technological hierarchy. Artificial intelligence intensified this structure dramatically. Advanced AI models require enormous computational power. Computational power requires advanced GPUs. Advanced GPUs require cutting-edge semiconductor manufacturing. The chain is direct. AI supremacy therefore depends heavily on chip supremacy. This is why companies like Nvidia became extraordinarily powerful. Nvidia's GPU evolved from gaming hardware into a foundational engines of the AI revolution. Demand exploded globally. Suddenly, semiconductor supply chain became national security concerns. Governments realized they had allowed critical infrastructure dependencies to become dangerously concentrated abroad. The United States responded with industrial policy measures like the CHIPS Act, designed to expand domestic semiconductor manufacturing capacity. Europe launched similar initiatives. Japan reinvested heavily in semiconductor partnerships. China accelerated massive state backed investment projects. The age of hyper globalized technological innocence ended. Countries began reshoring strategic industries because dependency during peace becomes vulnerability during conflict. But semiconductor manufacturing is uniquely difficult to replicate. Advanced chip production requires some of the most sophisticated industrial ecosystems humanity has ever built. The process involves precision engineering at microscopic scales, specialized chemicals, ultra pure materials, complex supply chains, and equipment so advanced that only a tiny number of firms on Earth can manufacture it. One company in particular became almost mythological within the semiconductor world, ASML in the Netherlands. ASML produces extreme ultraviolet lithography machines, among the most complex machines ever created. These systems are essential for manufacturing cutting-edge chips. Without them, production advanced semiconductors become extraordinarily difficult. This means even major powers depend on niche foreign suppliers. The semiconductor system therefore resembles a gigantic independent pyramid. American firms dominate chip design and software ecosystems. Taiwan dominates advanced manufacturing. The Netherlands dominates critical lithographic systems. Japan supplies essential materials and components. South Korea remains a major memory chip powerhouse. China possesses massive manufacturing scale but seeks technological independence. No single country controls the entire chain completely. This interdependence creates both stability and fragility simultaneously. In peacetime, globalization increases efficiency. In geopolitical confrontation, globalization becomes leverage. This is why semiconductor policy increasingly resembles military planning rather than ordinary trade policy. Factories are now strategic assets, engineers are strategic assets, supply chains are strategic assets, intellectual property is strategic territory. The world quietly entered a technological arms race, and unlike previous industrial races, this competition moves at extraordinary speed. Semiconductor generations evolve rapidly. Falling behind technologically for even a few years can produce major strategic disadvantages. The stakes go far beyond economics. Advanced chips determine military AI capabilities, enormous and autonomous weapon systems, cyber warfare capability, satellite processing, intelligence analysis, missile guidance, drone swarms, quantum computing research, and surveillance systems. Future wars may not be decided solely by troop numbers or tank counts, they may be decided by computational superiority. This changes the structure of global power itself. Historically, great powers emerged through control over land, industrial production, naval trade routes, or energy resources. Tomorrow's power may emerge through control over computational ecosystems. The nation capable of integrating semiconductors, artificial intelligence, energy infrastructure, cloud systems, communications networks into one coherent strategic machine may dominate the 21st century. But chips alone cannot create global dominance. Information must still move across networks, and increasingly states fear that foreign controlled digital systems could become instruments of coercion, which leads directly to the next battle, the struggle for digital sovereignty. Part 5. Digital sovereignty: why nations want their own internet. For decades, globalization promoted a seductive idea: the internet would erase borders. Technology companies spoke about a connected humanity. Politicians discussed a borderless information age. Economists imagined frictionless global integration. The internet was presented as a neutral space beyond geopolitics, an open digital ocean where information flowed freely regardless of nationality, ideology, or state power. That vision collapsed. The modern internet is fragmented into spheres of control. Countries increasingly view digital infrastructure the same way previous generations viewed oil fields, naval choke points, or nuclear technology, as instruments of sovereignty and survival. This transformation began slowly. At first, most governments tolerated dependence on foreign digital systems because the economic benefits were enormous. American platforms accelerated commerce, cloud infrastructure reduced cost, global connectivity boosted trade and innovation. But over time, states began recognizing the strategic implications on dependency. If foreign companies control communication systems, they influence public discourse. If foreign firms dominate cloud infrastructure, they gain leverage over economic systems. If foreign payment networks process transactions, sanctions could be made possible. If foreign social media platforms shape narratives, information influences shifts externally. If foreign states possess access to critical infrastructure during conflict, sovereignty becomes conditional. This realization fundamentally altered global geopolitics. The internet stopped being viewed merely as technological pattern, it became a strategic battle space. Among major powers, China moved most aggressively towards digital sovereignty. Beijing concluded early that dependency on foreign controlled platforms represented a long-term national security risk. The Chinese state therefore built parallel systems across nearly every major digital layer. Instead of Google, China developed Baidu. Instead of Facebook, China built platforms like WeChat and Weibo. Instead of relying fully on Western cloud infrastructure, Chinese firms expanded domestic ecosystems. Instead of depending entirely on foreign semiconductor access, Beijing invested heavily in domestic chip industries. Instead of trusting foreign payment systems, China built alternatives. This was not simply censorship policy. Western observers often reduce China's internet strategy to authoritarian information control alone. That analysis is incomplete. China's digital strategy is fundamentally about reducing strategic vulnerability. The Chinese leadership watched what happened to other countries subjected to sanctions, technological restrictions, financial exclusion, or external pressure. Beijing understood that the global digital system was not politically neutral. It was heavily influenced by American infrastructure dominance. China therefore sought resilience through partial separation. The result is what many analysts call the splinternet, the fragmentation of global internet into competing geopolitical ecosystems. Russia pursued a similar logic from a different angle. Moscow increasingly feared that dependence on Western controlled digital systems could become catastrophic during geopolitical confrontation. Russian officials therefore promoted the concept of sovereign internet, capable of functioning independently if disconnected from global systems. It included domestic routing capabilities, alternative financial systems, internal infrastructure controls, and legal mechanisms for information regulation. Again, this was not a merely ideological authoritarianism. It was strategic insulation. The logic is brutally simple. A country cannot claim true sovereignty if its communication infrastructure can be externally disrupted. The United States itself already demonstrated the power of infrastructure dominance repeatedly through sanctions, export controls, financial restrictions, and technological pressure. Washington could restrict semiconductor access, it could pressure software ecosystems, it could influence payment networks, it could restrict cloud services. This capability became American infrastructure dominance extraordinarily powerful, but information creates counterbalancing behavior. As American leverage increased, rival powers accelerated efforts to reduce dependency. Europe occupies a more complicated position. Unlike China or Russia, Europe remains deeply integrated with American technological ecosystems. European societies rely heavily on American cloud providers, social media platforms, operating systems, and semiconductor supply chains. At the same time, European policymakers increasingly fear becoming digitally subordinate. This produced growing discussion around European digital sovereignty. The concern isn't only security, it is also economic and political. If Europe lacks major indigenous platforms while relying heavily on foreign infrastructure, long-term strategic autonomy weakens. Data governance, privacy standards, industrial competitiveness, and AI development becomes partially dependent on external actors. This is why the European Union aggressively regulates large technology firms. Many people interpret European tech regulation purely through consumption rights or privacy constraints. In reality, there is Also, a deeper geopolitical dimension. Regulation becomes a substitute for infrastructure power. Europe lacks American style tech giants at comparable scale, so regulatory influence becomes one of its primary strategic tools. India represents another critical case. India possesses one of the world's largest internet populations and rapidly expanding digital infrastructure. The Indian state increasingly recognizes that digital systems will shape future economic and geopolitical influence. Programs involving digital identity systems, payment infrastructure, domestic manufacturing expansion, semiconductor ambitions, and telecommunications policy all reflect a broader strategic concern. How does a massive civilizational scale country avoid long-term technological dominance? India's challenge differs from China's. China built massive domestic alternatives relatively early. India remains more globally integrated and open while simultaneously attempting to strengthen internal capacity. The balance is delicate. Too much openness risks dependency, too much isolation risks technological stagnation. Most nations now face this dilemma. The Internet once promised universal integration; instead it created a new hierarchy based on infrastructure control, and this hierarchy increasingly overlaps with military power. Modern warfare now includes cyber operations, information warfare, financial restriction, infrastructure sabotage, and technological denial strategies. The battlefield expanded into digital systems. A nation disconnected from critical technologies may suffer economic paralysis without a single missile being fired. This is why governments increasingly treat technology firms as strategic actors rather than extraordinary corporations. Cloud providers now work with militaries. Satellite companies influence wars. Social media platforms shape elections and public narratives. AI firms affect intelligence competition. Semiconductor manufacturers influence national security calculations. The boundary between civilian infrastructure and geopolitical power is dissolving. At the same time, ordinary citizens remain largely unaware of how deeply integrated their lives have become with these systems. Most people think they use apps. In reality, they exist inside gigantic infrastructure ecosystems shaped by states, corporations, industrial agencies, and global capital networks. This is dangerous simplification. AI is infrastructure. Behind every advanced AI model lies an enormous industrial machine consuming chips, electricity, cooling systems, data transmission capacity, engineering talent, rare minerals and financial capital at scale comparable to major economic industries. The public sees the interface, a chatbot, an image generator, a recommendation algorithm, and an autonomous drone. But beneath that interface exists one of the most resource-intensive technological ecosystems humanity has ever created. This changes the geopolitical meaning of artificial intelligence completely. The AI race isn't merely a competition between programmers or companies. It is competition between infrastructure systems. Whoever can sustain the largest computational ecosystems gains structural advantages in economics, military capability, scientific research, and cyber warfare, surveillance, automation, and information control. Complexity generates fragility as well. Over time, the civilian civilization also became dependent on them. GPS system transformed transportation and logistics. Satellite communications expanded global connectivity. Weather satellites improved forecasting and disaster planning. Financial systems began using satellite time synchronization. Commercial imaging systems revolutionized inte- intelligence gathering. The fragile empire: what happens if the global internet system fails? Most civilization operates on an assumption so deeply embedded that most people never consciously think about it. The system will continue functioning tomorrow. Electricity will flow, payments will process, internet connections will work. This dependency creates extraordinary efficiency. Information moves globally in milliseconds. Financial systems coordinate across continents instantly. Logistical chains optimize dramatically. Stock markets might halt trading. ATMs could stop functioning. Traffic systems could suffer delays. Conclusion: the empire beneath civilization. Empires once ruled through visible force. Roman roads carried legions across continents. British warships controlled maritime trade. Industrial powers dominated through steel, oil, factories, and railroads. The modern empire operates differently. It runs through infrastructure, invisible infrastructure. invisible infrastructure, fiber optic cables beneath oceans, semiconductor fabs hidden inside industrial corridors, satellites orbiting silently above Earth, cloud servers inside fortified data centers, AI systems processing information continuously, cyber networks operating beyond public awareness, electrical grids feeding computational civilization. Is the this is the empire beneath civilization itself. Most people never see it, they only interact with interfaces, smartphones, apps, streaming platforms, data payments, social media, etc. The 21st century is increasingly defined not only by who controls the most land or by who controls the infrastructure system connecting the planet together. The strategic hierarchy has shifted. Oil still matters enormously, military power still matters enormously, geography still matters enormously. This is why global competition intensified so dramatically. The United States seeks to preserve digital dominance built over decades of technological leadership, military power, venture capital, and infrastructure scale. China seeks technological sovereignty to avoid strategic dependency and containment. Europe seeks regulatory and infrastructural autonomy. Russia seeks insulation from external pressure. A handful of corporations control enormous portions of cloud infrastructure. A handful of regions manufacture advanced semiconductors. A handful of countries dominate orbital systems. A handful of choke points carry massive portions of global information traffic. Civilization became globally integrated but structurally concentrated. This creates extraordinary efficiency, but it also creates extraordinary fragility. Pure conflict. Future conflict may begin invisibly. Cyber attacks, semiconductor embargoes, cable sabotages, AI infrastructure denial, financial restrictions, satellite interference, algorithmic disinformation, digital fragmentation. The battle of the future may target systems before cities, infrastructure before territory, networks before armies. The challenge is the meaning of power itself. Power is no longer merely the ability to destroy, it is the ability to sustain systems while rivals fail. The nation capable of preserving energy continuity, computational capacity, communications reliability, semiconductor access, cyber resilience, and AI superiority may dominate the next era of history. It intensified geopolitics into every layer of civilization. The internet is not separate from reality. It is the reality's nervous system, like every like every nervous system, control over it determines who can coordinate, influence, protect, disrupt, or dominate the larger organism. The hidden truth beneath modern civilization: the world is no longer held together primarily by ideology, diplomacy, or even economics alone. It is held together by infrastructure, invisible infrastructure, fragile infrastructure, militarized infrastructure. The countries that control this infrastructure do not merely influence the world, they shape the operating system of human civilization itself.